Hello everyone, this is Glynn Hodges, the Results Coach. Welcome to Chattanooga Self-Improvement Meetup, a mastermind group where we listen, ask questions, comment, and learn in an effort to make each person the best version of themselves, thus helping to make the world a better place in which to live. We are a closely connected group of truly authentic people. We are an exemplary illustration of the fact that authenticity is the great connector. I'm Glynn Hodges. I don't have to tell you a whole lot about me, but most of you know I love to tell stories, and I use stories to emphasize points. And I've been thinking about doing something a little bit different. In fact, with Angela, whom introduced herself earlier up in Maryland. I met her on Evan Carmichael's program, Movement Makers, on Instagram. And I have been just kind of deciding what I'm going to do as far as Instagram, which I'll be on Instagram Live when I kick it off. And I think it'll be called What's the Point, which is the title of today's program. We all hear stories, and based on our individual experiences, our life experiences, and what state we're in at the very moment, everything we hear, we all interpret differently. Would you agree? Could I see a thumbs up? Anybody? So with that in mind, I'm going to share a story many of you have heard, but I illustrate a point with it normally. And I think there's more to be gained from the story. Many of you recognize it when I say it's my Ollie story. So let's kick it off. I met Ollie, I think it was in 2013. I was at an event in Chicago, Illinois. It rained, it snowed, it sleeted, the wind blew. It was Chicago. In fact, to give you a little background, when I say it rained, when we pulled into the Hyatt O'Hara, there were actually sandbags, and it took about an hour and a half to get from the airport by taxi then. It wasn't Uber, I went by taxi. It took about an hour and a half. I could have walked it in probably 30 minutes. But so we did have rain. But I met Ollie early on, and he had such a warm personality. He was the kind of guy that I felt like I had known all my life. Have you ever met someone like that? They just tend to open their heart to you. Well, I learned that Ollie had actually been bullied while he was in grammar school. And I believe it was early in his 5th grade year, he was telling me that he was crossing this playground one morning, and he happened to cross the path of Dale. Now, Dale was a schoolyard bully. Ollie was feeling a little braver this morning, so he decided that he would stand his ground. Well, the rest of the story is that once Ollie finally got up and brushed the dirt off his clothes, he walked into school rather embarrassed and with his head low. But that afternoon, the school bell rang, and as Ollie was exiting the building, his friends advised him where old Dale, the schoolyard bully, was. And thinking that, he would definitely choose an alternate path, but no, not this day. Ollie just walked directly toward Dale. And as he approached Dale, he extended his hand and he said, "Dale, my name is Ollie, and I don't want to be afraid of you all year. Can it just be your friend?" Now, can you imagine this little 5th grader standing there trying to appear to be calm on the outside? The seconds seemed like minutes. The minutes seemed like hours. Ollie was surprised as he felt Dale grip his hand. And even more surprised when he said, "Sure, Ollie, I'll be your friend. And by the way, if anyone ever bothers you on this playground, you call me and I'll come running." a new friendship was born. It wasn't too long ago I called Ollie on his cell phone. He works in Washington, D.C. He said, "Hi, Glynn. How are you, buddy?" Said, "I've just purchased a sandwich from my favorite street vendor here in D.C. and I would love to catch up. But if you don't mind, I need to nibble on my sandwich as I walk and we chat." Well, we chatted for a few moments and Ollie laughingly interrupted. He said, "Glynn, I've just arrived at a very busy intersection and it might be pushing my luck to be crossing a busy street, nibbling on a sandwich while talking on a cell phone." Well, I couldn't help but laugh. If you ever get to meet Ollie and understand his sense of humor. You see, Ollie walks with the aid of a long white cane. He's blind. He's been blind since birth. So folks, it's mastermind time. What's the point? Who would like to kick it off? What's the point? Well, if you're not going to jump in, I'm going to call on you.
It reminds me of a story I heard in a networking last week where they were talking about, and I won't say the story well, but the bottom line was about perception. And the story goes something about there's a car crash and the father and the son die. And the father dies, the son gets wheeled into the emergency room, and the doctor says, "I can't operate. This is my son." And so it's a riddle. We just heard the father died. Who's the doctor? And it goes through and it goes through. And depending on your perception, some people are trying to figure out, did he have two dads? Was it a stepdad, etc.? And then depending on the audience, some people are like, the doctor was a woman. And your story had us with this one picture. And then I kept thinking, there's something about this guy that I haven't figured out yet. There's something there that is not fully given me the picture yet. And then you gave us the rest of the picture. And the way that you described him was just tremendous courage and valuing himself. Those were my immediate thoughts.
Thank you. Who else would like to jump in? Miss Marcia? You and Rick together surely have a comment.
He's taking me. I always have a comment, don't I? Yeah, my whole thing, particularly being an artist and a designer, is to have a different point of view. And sometimes the point of view is to not have one. And that's a really great story. To me, you really have to be able to kind of humble yourself a little bit, to ask yourself if what you're thinking is incorrect or can be added, change it. I mean, if you have say in color, if you add blue to yellow, you want green. And so having a different point of view, particularly in designing something new like I'm doing right now, it's important to constantly question your own point of view that you have and see if there isn't a better one. Or, I mean, I've always said that you can't lose if you do that. You either find out you were thinking correctly, or you add to it and you come up with even better. You really can't lose. So, you know, to me, that's one of the most important things about, say, education, for instance. Education should really be something that's open-ended and should allow you to add to and not box in. And so it's an important thing that I think everybody needs to, it's almost like a muscle. You need to practice that. You need to just constantly ask yourself, okay, am I looking at this the right way? If you have especially if it's an emotional opinion. I mean, it's so much to the politics and everything else that's going on these days. There's so many emotional ties. The real important thing is to, you know, leave it open-ended and you know, give some other opinions and ideas a chance.
Uh,
I got something out of the story, Glynn.
yeah, share with us.
I have two friends that are blind, actually, and I find it amazing what they are capable of. And in the beginning, on the grade school playground, Ollie's friends are trying to protect him by telling him not to do something, not to go near the bully. But in actuality, Ollie only advanced when he faced what everybody else warned him of. So Ollie was able to grow by ignoring the common wisdom or the overprotectiveness of his friends and branched out. One of my friends who's blind just this weekend made an amazing breakfast of poached eggs, hollandaise sauce for his wife, who's perfectly capable. But he is an amazing individual, and it stutters me to see what he's capable of that nobody else thought that he was. So.
Deborah, you know, you should be able to give us a different perspective on this. Do we tend to classify people? Do we tend to put them in a box? Are you still with us?
I am.
Yeah.
And we all have our biases as part of human nature. The question is, what do we do with them? And I'll share with you that back in the day, when I was a dancer and dance teacher, I taught at a school for the blind. And it was interesting to me that there was a culture there that was very lovely, humane. There were some things that they were not able to deal with, but it was my job to translate movement and dance into their world. And seeing that job, that role, I think is something that Ollie has embedded in him, that he teaches other people his world and understands that, you know, they don't know and they make mistakes and they're afraid. And and I know Ollie myself, so I know that he's just an amazing, strong person who cares deeply about others. And when you see that, it changes how you see him.
Thank you, Deborah. And I have talked to Ollie about actually talking to the group. And I haven't talked with him lately, Deborah. Is he back on the East Coast or is he still in California?
Last time I spoke to him, I think he was back at the East Coast, back at work.
Right.
He was speaking with a group of executives that I was involved in, talking about his work.
Good. Thank you. Greg, you've heard that story a few times. You know the points that I usually make with it. What's your take on it? What do you think? What's another message that you get from it?
I don't know if I have anything new to say based on what everyone else said, but yeah, I think it took a lot of courage for Ollie to do what he did. And I thought an interesting point for me was how he, even though he's blind, he's the only one of his friends who could see what the, not necessarily the right thing to do was, because it could have backfired, but he's the only one who took that courage and introduced himself to the bully. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting point.
Why do you think bullies exist? What makes a bully a bully? Is it low self-esteem?
Yeah, that can be part of it, but I think a lot of kids follow what other kids are doing as well. So maybe there's one kid with low self-esteem for whatever reason, and then at that age, a lot of people just follow everyone else, and they kind of join in because they don't know any better.
I think so, true.
I think one reason for that is that it's fear. People act bullyish because they're really afraid of not being able to control the situation. They're afraid of the situation. Mm-hmm. So, you puff up like a blowfish, or there's many examples of birds that stick their wings out and try to look bigger, that kind of thing. But again, going back to the point of view, the knowledge helps get rid of fear, because fear is the firstborn of ignorance. And that's what, usually you find that if you talk to somebody or something, you're afraid of yourself, the fear is always bigger than the problem, about 95% of the time. So it's a case of one reason people are bullies, and I've always run into. I have an interesting story. As an artist, people generally looked at me as something that was easily to be bullied. But very early on, I saw a movie about a lifeboat, and the ship sunk, and all these people were in this lifeboat, different people from different walks of life. And then they got into this storm, and they realized there was 2 people in the boat. And I think Tyrone Power or somebody was in this movie, but it sort of taught me a lesson that the people that volunteered to leave and the ones that they threw out were generally the weaker ones. The artists were being tossed over because they had a bigger view of things, the ones that were volunteering, and they needed to be strong ones and bullies to help keep the boat afloat for anybody to survive. And I thought that's kind of a strange point of view. And but I'm learning a lesson here. So I decided to be what I call a fighting artist. I'm willing to stand up for things, even though I have a sort of a broader, more positive view of stuff. It's an interesting combination, and it takes work. But I knew that if I was in that boat, I'm not going to be one of the ones that gets thrown out. I'm an artist. I'm not getting thrown out of the boat.
Angela, what's your take on that?
Well, thank you for asking me. I love what everybody has shared. I'm just really touched by the story, and realizing that Ollie is a real, that he's real, not fictitious, just makes it even better. I want to meet this person. Well, there's so many things about this story. Leadership. He obviously saw the potential, and I think in his bully. I think oftentimes we, someone like Ollie, he sees beyond that initial character flaw of someone. It just seems that way to me. And it also, I like what Marcia said. I know it's not Marcia, I'm sorry, about fear, and that how we, I think that's just such a real, it's so true. We are always I have my thought around this. I think this is it. He was, Ollie wasn't afraid of Dale. Dale was afraid of Ollie. This is obviously my interpretation, my perspective, and that because he doesn't really understand what it's like to be blind. So the fear there for him was overwhelming. And so the way that he treated him came out that way as a bully. Maybe he was a bully his whole life. I don't know. But I think the fear really, I think that's very common to us as a society in the world, is that we're afraid of what we don't know or understand. And then so we react on that. And we may not be like Dale, but obviously Dale was very fearful of not really understanding or identifying, or not able to relate to Ollie. So he took it out on him because he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't, that's my thought. But Ollie, being the kind-hearted human that he is, he saw beyond that, and he had so much courage, and I love that so much. Thanks for letting me share that.
You know, I might just add
something. If I, oh, sorry.
Excuse me, Deborah. Go right ahead.
One of the things about that story that starts to seep into me is that Ollie had friends. He had friends around him who warned him, who tried to protect him. And I think that's a very important part, a very important piece of the story, because so many times people who get bullied feel they're alone, that they're vulnerable, that they have nobody to back them up. And that's not the situation for Ollie, who is so easily able to make friends. And the bully probably isn't. And the idea that you have a crew who backs you, right, I think is so important in how you respond in life. And I'll share this in that when we first came to America from British Bermuda, we still spoke very much like British colonials. And our accent was, even at age 7, it was quite, well, something out of Victorian England. And for Americans, it must have sounded quite arrogant. And it made me a great target for bullying. And I did. I got hurt by a little boy and his crew, right? The reason that I was able to recover from it is my older brother went out, found the kid, marched him back to our apartment, and forced him to apologize to me. And suddenly I stopped crying. I said, oh, I'm not alone after all. That whole idea of not being alone, of having backup, and then knowing right from wrong and knowing that it's going to be okay is just an amazing experience. And Ollie, being Ollie, must have known that from day one. He was never alone.
Coach Dan, what's your take on it?
A lot of great comments here. I think this has been torn apart pretty well on many different fronts. I think courage is the ultimate upfront story. That's pretty obvious. Perspective is on the back end when we learn that he's blind. The one thing that I haven't heard anybody mention that I truly believe was shown by Ollie, and that is vulnerability is a superpower. The answer is always no if you don't ask. And how many actually have the courage to ask, really have the courage to ask? Because I find that when we are vulnerable, when we do reach out for help, that's when we find that, like Deborah says, that team that's behind us, those people that support us, who are they? Because we start to figure out quickly who supports us and who doesn't. So vulnerability is a superpower.
Thank you, Dan. Ron, have you commented? Ron Cooper?
Glynn, I've got several thoughts, but just to advance what everybody else is saying, I think confidence, and I don't know Ollie, but it's pretty, from what you said in your story, Ollie is confident in to advance what Dan said about being vulnerable. To be vulnerable, you have to have a level of confidence that I am who I am and I'm moving forward with who I am. My experience with bullies is the Dales of the world want to demean you, whereas we, everyone on this call, want to advance people. And so when I learned that if I were just having a telephone conversation and I did not know that Ollie was blind, if I would have learned that, I want to be careful not to label him or provide any kind of a stigma, because he would probably be very quick to tell me, I don't have any disabilities. And so I want to make sure that I don't label him in that way, but rather I do care enough to learn about his situation and adapt to him. So that's just, for me, there are a lot of very positive takes from this story, and what everyone has contributed to this.
Thank you, Ron.
You know, I have one more.
Yes.
I'm not trying to hog it, but you know, Ollie had a great advantage here. Is one thing that is an interesting perspective that in not believing everything you see, the fact that Ollie couldn't see Dale, so he couldn't see Dale maybe rearing back, something like that, like everybody else might. And then that respect, the other side is Dale could see him coming up to him, but he probably hadn't seen a whole lot of people come straight up to him. So he might have been a little bit afraid of that. So it's just different psychological things. But the fact that Ollie couldn't see him, I think helped, because he wasn't believing what he was seeing. He wasn't seeing anything. He might even in the back of his head somewhere says, my friends may have told me he was over here and he's not. Maybe I'm just talking to a tree, but this is what I want to do. It didn't, his ability not to see helped him do what he wanted to do. I mean, it's an odd thing, but so many times we see stuff and we believe it because our minds are set, you know, for good or bad. We're set to believe what we see. Our sight is the first thing we use to define something, and a situation, a person, whatever. And not having that sometimes it kind of helps, or at least learning to not believe it all the time. I know that I saw this test on television about the brain, and they had 4 dots on the screen. And if you just focus on one dot, just look at it, look at it, look at it, the other 3 disappear. And it doesn't mean they're gone. It's because it literally means even your eyes are seeing it, but your brain has decided, okay, they're unimportant. We're looking at this, and it erases. And that gives you, you know, that's kind of scary, really. You start thinking of you're missing out on something because you're so focused on something else, but your brain is literally doing that. But I know in the construction business, you have to be really aware of things all the time, because there's, like if you're working in an attic, for instance, you know not to step on the sheetrock part because you go straight through. You have to step on the beams, but while you're looking down at that, you have to watch out for the nails that are sticking through from the roof from the shingles that are on the outside. You have to, it's an awareness problem, but there's a certain advantage Ollie had to not being able to see what he was getting into and being able to focus on what he wanted to do.
Miss Marcia, you look like you want to share something there.
Well, I do. I was thinking about the whole bullying thing. For those of you who know me as an adult person, you'll probably be surprised that when I was a kid, I was bullied a lot. It didn't come natural for me to stand up for myself. I would fight or flight. I would flight every time, you know. And when I was 7, we moved into this new neighborhood in Atlanta that was just a couple of miles from the Emory University campus. The neighborhood, the property had been owned by the man who became our neighbor. He was an archaeologist. And so we were the first ones that built on his street. And so, you know, I was pretty much alone on that cul-de-sac, but there was streets over that had already been built. Well, the funny thing was that my dad was a gospel singer, and he had a gospel radio show and a TV show. Everybody who bought property and built in that neighborhood was either doctors or lawyers or professors over at Emory. And it was kind of intellectually elite. And they considered us really the odd family out, my dad being a gospel singer. So there was this one day when I decided I was going to venture over to the other part that was already developed and see what was over there. And because this was before school started, and this boy and his little gang, but he was several years older than me, and he was quite tall. They saw me coming down the street and they blocked the street up, and said, no, you can't, you don't belong here. You can't come down here. And so, I got off my bike and, I didn't want to get into it. I was going to go away. And, but then they started pushing me and pushing my bike over and all this. And this gal became my good friend. Her name was Barbara Stein. She came running out of nowhere and she went up against all those guys and said, leave her alone, bully, I know, or I'll tell your mother. And she just, and I sat there in amazement and watched her just go up against all the guys on my behalf. And interestingly enough, it wasn't too long after that I was in a situation where I saw another kid being bullied. And this little girl had a big mark on her face, a big blood mark. And so they were making fun of how she looked. And it just incensed me. And so I went up against them on her behalf. And over the years, that's how I got the courage to not let bullies bully me, was the pathway of defending others. And so gradually I found the courage to defend myself. And now, of course, I've been doing it long enough, it's a natural thing for me. But it wasn't always. And listening to the story, of course, I'd heard you talk about Ollie before, but I'd never heard that particular story, Glynn. And I had forgotten that Ollie was blind, because frequently you don't refer to him in any way other than your friend and tell stories or whatever. And I'd just forgotten. And I think one of the reasons that we were all quiet after was you have to reprocess the whole story in your head, knowing that that kid was blind. You have to go, okay, what does that mean exactly? Think of it, that story again in those terms, and what kind of, what that took for him. But I think that was a good observation that Rick made about that he didn't see the mountain that he was up against, and that we need to be aware of when we see a situation to not let the bigness of it intimidate us, or you don't get anything accomplished. That's it.
Glynn,
Yes, sir.
One thing that maybe I'd like to add, that so much of so many times we quickly offer our own opinion based upon what we have learned and what we think is astute and all of those things in a particular situation or environment. And what really happens is that we oftentimes lose more than we gain, simply because we don't ask questions, we don't reach out to the other person to understand their side or their in-depth feelings about it. And so we oftentimes can gain endearment, emotional feeling or understanding of the other person, and benefit ourselves more greatly by understanding or asking questions or being involved with an individual to fully understand the other things that we don't or haven't understood, whether it be the depth of a blind person or a deaf person or whatever it might be. And so many times I think we can gain more by being involved in asking and putting ourselves in a far different situation than what our own history and environment has been.
Well said there, Joe. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Sylvia, what's your take on this?
Thank you, Glynn. I have a couple of ideas about the story. I believe that because of Ollie's background, he has developed his other senses to a finer degree as well. We hear that often. To describe people with a handicap, it enhances some other sense that you have. And so since he couldn't see, he had probably developed a very strong analytical sense of his hearing. And one of the things you can learn by hearing is there are subtle subtones and meaning in somebody's voice. And in this case, probably just by hearing the bully talk, listening to him, he could hear maybe his fear or his insecurity or his even neglect. There are a lot of things that Ollie could have derived from the experience that you and I wouldn't have an opportunity to see literally because of his other senses. It's a great story, Glynn. I think you can, even as today demonstrates, tell that story and elicit a lot of different responses from your audience. But thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I think you're so right on as far as developing our hearing skills and listening skills. I know that when I started my executive search business back in 1984, that was pre-Zoom. And so it was all over the telephone. Many of my candidates I never met, and it was all over the telephone. And so I learned to be a very good listener. I was listening for that tone of voice and the change in the tone of voice. So you're right on. It can tell you so much. You can immediately begin to tell if someone's uncomfortable with a question you ask, if maybe they're not maybe telling the complete truth. And that's when I would bore in, because if I was, my clients paid me big fees. And I had to know my candidate quite well. Aram, you got it. What's your take on this? Have we called on you, buddy?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've enjoyed listening to everyone's opinions. Again, the thing that caught me by surprise was, the fact that he was blind. And I'm not sure what else to add. I agree with Rick that, sometimes not seeing what you're up against you is an advantage. And I think, when you do see what you're up to, that causes fear. And it's a little bit harder to overcome. But yeah, I agree with, what everyone has said, all the different aspects, the different views from, we all heard the same story, but we all get something slightly different out of it.
Yeah, you've heard me say many times, fear stands for false evidence appearing real. So with Ollie not being able to see, how do you think that he possibly interpreted things differently than someone that could have seen Dale?
I'd like to
Deborah.
answer that. I suspect that Ollie had been bullied a number of times before this particular incident. That we're talking kids, you know, and they're not quite civilized yet. So they're going to pick on people who are different. And until they learn a little more about their own responsibilities in this, they think it's funny. And so my guess is that Ollie was already an expert in dealing with a sort of Lord of the Flies situation. Some of you may not be familiar with that, but it means that when you're out on the playground at school, it's kind of wild and crazy. And if you're used to it, if you've dealt with it, you and your friends have dealt with it before, you've got practice. And to be able to have that behind you, whether you're blind or not, it gives you a tremendous amount of confidence. And that's what he had. He still has.
Amen.
Glynn?
Yes, Marsha.
No, it was me.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, go, Joe.
I go back to my favorite saying for fear, and that is, fear is the misuse of imagination. And if you stop and really think about that, you'll see in so many cases we all have been wrong simply because our imagination has gotten the best of us. We think negatively in most cases, and we don't think positively. And your imagination is a detriment to you in most of those critical situations where you apply the wrong thought process.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, Marsha.
Well, I think most of you know that our company, Aisha's Friends, is based on the idea of a special needs girl named Aisha. And the fact is that when she had surgery and brain surgery, and her disability was invisible, hidden under her hairline, but because of what she went through a lot of kids making fun of her, and there was all kind of physical things. She couldn't participate in school and whatever. And one of the things that drove the idea was, of course, she saw other kids in the hospital that had very visible disabilities. Was that she wanted this doll to be able to bridge a gap of understanding between kids, where they would have a similar doll, only one would look like the kid that had a visible disability and one wouldn't, and they could play together. And that was her drive, so that the kids could grow to understand each other better. And as Rick and I have gone around and met so many people in the community that supports young people and adults with physical disabilities, one of the thought processes that we ran into in completely different areas was the person who is professional saying that if everyone understood that you are just a blink of the eye away from being disabled yourself, car wreck, you fall down a flight of stairs, anything, so many things that could happen, and that they had seen so many people who had been vital physically and suddenly just were brought to their knees with a disability that was unexpected. Of course, it always is unexpected. That if people understood that, then they would immediately have more empathy for someone who was dealing with a disability, and that how they bring that thought process into the arena of helping the disabled person understand why they're being treated in a dismissive manner, because that person doesn't understand that they could be disabled as well. And so again, we're talking about perception. How do people perceive things? And when they said that, I mean, it had never occurred to me. I mean, I know that I used to be a nurse. I've certainly seen people injured and become suddenly disabled, but to realize that on a depth of where you immediately communicate on a different level with the person who's dealing with a disability. I think if everyone had that perspective, that the barriers would just be gone.
You know, think about the perception that Dale, the schoolyard bully, had when he saw Ollie coming toward him after school. Now, bear in mind, many of you probably, I didn't go into any detail. I just said Ollie finally got up from the ground, brushed the dirt off. Dale didn't hit him. You know what he did to just really humiliate Ollie? He grabbed him by his hands and he swung him around. He literally, Ollie said he had him where his body was parallel to the ground. He was swinging him around so fast, and then he let him go. So here he fell to the ground and literally skidded because he was going so fast. So do you think someone may have said something to Dale during the day? And so how do you think Dale felt when he saw Ollie walking toward him that afternoon? Could Dale have possibly been frightened? Jump in.
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of a combination, obviously, but it's hard to know. It's just an interesting lesson in perspective. And there's a lot of things that could happen. You know? I even wonder what did Ollie think just for a moment there when he was spinning through the air with this guy around. That might have been an interesting sensation. I probably never did that before, but
yeah.
You know,
well, and who knows? I mean, the very fact that Dale accepted his friendship so quickly, when Ollie stood up after that and brushed himself off with dignity, apparently, I mean, Dale might have felt terrible. You know, he might have regretted it.
You know, I might add, when I'm telling the story, in which many of you have seen the video where I told that on stage, but Ollie graduated with a Juris Doctorate degree. He served the U.S. Department of Justice as an attorney for many years, and he's with the Department of Education now, and is a 2-time presidential appointee. So I just thought it would be appropriate to add it at this point. I forgot who it is that called in that we don't have the number from here in 423. We haven't heard from you lately, and I'm sorry, I forgot who you are. Would our telephone caller like to jump in? Okay.
That's your entrepreneur. That's your entrepreneur friend, Glynn.
Which one?
The one gentleman who said that he was attempting to be an entrepreneur with you.
Gosh, I'm drawing a blank.
You're blessed with gray matter that
yeah,
it's fading like the rest of us.
Well, I to get me going today, I went up to the convenience store and bought me a Bang energy drink today. Oh, geez, not very good for you, but it works pretty good. Angela, you're smiling. You know, when you smile, you get called on. Maybe, do you want to dance or do you want to talk? Unmute yourself.
I'm just smiling at the gray matter. Because, oh my goodness.
I think Joe was trying to say gray hair.
Oh, it's such a great conversation. I love the perspectives, and you know, just it's just brilliant, you know, to hear the different, you know, perspectives around someone's life, and not only just one life, but also Dale's. And when you're talking about just empathy and compassion, and real confident, the confidence that that Ollie has and still has, I'm sure. You know, I have a tendency to, I was bullied when I was, you know, in middle school, and actually in elementary school, but I won't go into it. But it's interesting to be, you know, when I think about, you know, the person that bullied me, you know, my heart, I love the Lord. So I'm like, oh, she ended up passing away years and years and years ago. She was found in a hotel, no clothes on, you know, naked, and she had died. And I don't know if it was from an overdose or what the real story, probably. But just really had her own struggles in her life. And so I often think about what sort of compassion comes for, how do you rummage up the compassion and forgiveness for people that hurt us. And I would imagine that Ollie is a very forgiving and wonderful human being. And you know, just that coming together and saying, hey, let's be buds. You know, that's, so forgiveness, I think of forgiveness in this story a lot. So that's it.
You know, I may have shared with some of you before, but last time Barbara and I were with Ollie, we were in Washington and we were walking to dinner, and Barbara actually asked Ollie if he would please slow down because she couldn't keep up with him. Now, that's walking with self-confidence. But since then, prior to COVID, Ollie was crossing the street there in DC, and a overly anxious driver actually went around another car that was stopped at a stoplight and hit Ollie. That was devastating for him. It really, he lost his self-confidence there for a while. And it was so sad. And then following that, he was walking there. If any of you are familiar with Crystal City, which is basically the underground city there in DC, you can walk most everywhere and not go outside. And there are cameras everywhere. It's just immaculately clean. But a guy tried to pick his pocket, and Ollie screamed and hollered and beat on him with his white cane. And the guy left. Ollie got up, and lo and behold, the guy came back again to try and get his wallet. Ollie was able to beat him off again, and or frighten him in some way. But can you imagine having to deal with that? Would you have the courage to keep going? And now he's going strong again. But that takes real determination. I don't know if I would. Yes, who was about to speak?
I'd like to ask Dan Hall something. I follow Dan avidly on Facebook because I just adore his daughter, and the relationship just cracks me up. And of course, she takes judo and whatever, and is in these tournaments. I'd like him to share a little bit about how he helps her understand these kind of concepts.
Good question, Marcia. Good question. I learned a long time ago. I went through some dark times during the divorce with her mother. And, you know, I woke up one morning and I asked myself the very question, what do you want? And it took me a while to define that, but I looked around at everything I'd accumulated, all the stuff in the houses and the cars and all this crap. I said, you know what, Lord? I said, I don't need any of this stuff. Take it all if you need to. What do you want? I said, I want to wake up happy every day. And I said, I've got a task. I said, right now, I have a relationship with her mother where if I got hit by a train, she wouldn't care. And probably the same is true in reverse. So I said, I've got to raise this little girl with integrity. And how am I going to do that? And the only way to do that is by leading by example. So that's what I had to do. And so many times I look back and I'm like, I wanted to throw the towel in. I want to be like, F this, I'm done. I'm not doing it. I can't do it. This is going to kill me, right? But every time I come back to it, with every decision I make with her, I'm like, I need to set the example here because she is watching not only me, but she's watching her mother. She's watching both of us, you know, and we split when she was 6 months old. And I look back now, and especially on our relationship, that little girl knows that she has two loving parents that love each other and that we're going to do what's right for her. So it's about perspective again. And, you know, while her mother could have tore me down for whatever, or vice versa, or we could have talked crap about each other this whole time, we just decided, you know what, we're going to do it a different way. We're going to do it a way that a lot of people don't. They don't even try to, because it's a shit ton of work, quite frankly. But with every decision, she also understands that I'm not perfect and I do make mistakes, and I'm very vulnerable with her when I make mistakes. So she has a level of trust with me that what Dad says is the truth. So I think it's not lying to them, because they're actually way smarter than we are. They're not jaded by life. They're not corrupted by all the crap that we've seen. So they're just very raw, very true. They're very in tune with energy. And I try to be conscious of that. So I teach her by doing. I don't tell her, listen, you can have everything in life. You can have this, you can have. No, I go out and I show her. We've got to lead by example. Otherwise it's just words. So, and that's the same with failure too. I mean, you can go win at your karate tournaments, but guess what? You're going to fail. And there was a quick story. She was on a winning streak for a long time, and she got a little cocky. So what I did is, she's 9 years old. I entered her in open weight, open rank competition. So her first fight, after she was on this big winning streak, she ended up fighting a black belt that was 13 years old, twice as tall as her, and had hands the size of catcher's mitts. And you know, you know how that went, right? She got pounded around pretty good, and no father wants to see that, you know, rest assured. However, before the end of this tournament, she came over to me and she's like, Dad, she goes, I'm still glad I came. And I'm like, that's it. There's the lesson right there. And she got a picture with this girl and whatever else. But I think the cool thing is, you got to be humbled. You know, you can win all the time, but you're going to be humbled sooner or later. And you've got to realize, and you got to have that awareness. So all these things combined, you know, I'm not the perfect parent, but I let her see my mistakes. I let her see my wins. And I try to lead by example the best I can.
You're authentic, you're transparent, and people do what people see. How many times, Dan, have you found yourself responding to a situation or to a comment someone has said and said, oh, that sounded just like my dad. That sounded just like my mom. Have you ever?
I try to, of course, I realize we're programmed a certain way from birth, through our childhood, through our experiences. And I've had to go through and unprogram a lot of that and rewire my brain to think like I do now. So when we come into these different circumstances, we have a choice. How do we want to see this? What's our perspective? My perspective tends to be that there's a solution for everything. If you bring me a problem, that's cool. We'll talk about it. And we're going to talk about it once. But after that, all we're going to talk about is solutions, and we're going to actually do them. You know, we can't sit in a place of problems or obstacles or negativity. It's just not a good place to be. So that's how, personally, that's how I handle those things.
Well, you're a true example, as is, I think, everyone in this group. We practice what we preach. Sometimes we stump our toe, but we admit it to others and we move on. I see you smiling there, Kelly. Have you ever stumped your toe?
A little bit too much of a regular basis. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I'm a late bloomer when it comes to the area of emotional intelligence. And so, yeah, I've stubbed my toe quite a few times, and I'll probably continue to do that to some extent, but at least I'm a little more self-aware.
Well, you do a lot of coaching, Kelly, as does Dan and others on here, Angela, and it's all about emotional intelligence. And Ron also is a coach. It's emotional intelligence. And I think probably the biggest problem that people that decide they want to be a coach, take a course or get certification or something, is that they are not allowing themselves to completely connect with the person they're trying to coach.
I appreciate
They
you
are
saying
so conscious of, oh, what kind of cute comment or question am I going to ask now, that they're not in tune with the person that they're trying to coach. So
it's about putting ego aside. For me, if I am working with someone as a coach, the focus is on them, and the ego is put aside. And I think that's so important. I really liked what Dan said earlier. I did a video just yesterday because I continue to encounter people that are living in the I have to figure it all out by myself. And I keep telling people I am a charter member of that club and I've left it. Throw away your membership card, rip it in half, because in the end, we can't do all this by ourselves. I'm an independent person. I'd love to be able to figure it all out by myself, and I can't. And that is something that I continue to encounter people. Well, I can't get this done, or this person didn't email me back, or whatever. So what? Get over it and just keep pushing. And this being a member of the I have to figure it all out by myself club, I would offer that if you are a member of that, please leave it. And, that vulnerability is hard. And a friend of mine sent me Brene Brown a few years ago, and I said, I am not listening to this crap. And she said, that's why I sent it to you. And it was good. It was a good lesson, and it taught me some things. And so that kind of thing resonates for me. But if I'm coaching someone, it's not about me. It is not about me. I will be useless if I think it's about me.
thank you. I think this is really appropriate. I found the text Vincent Phipps sent me. His subject for our next mastermind will be, let your actions be your evidence. So isn't that really what we're talking about here? Is what Dan was talking about as far as with his daughter. So I think that's going to be a great follow-up. Who else would like to share something else? Just jump in. This is a free-flowing mastermind.
So real quick.
Yeah, Dan?
We talk about perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm among a very intelligent group here. Can you answer me this? 40 cows in a field, 28 chickens. How many didn't?
40 cows, 28 chickens. How many didn't?
Correct.
Okay, who's going to jump in and answer the question? No one?
I say they all did.
What, Rick?
I say they all did.
No.
That's what you're talking.
I'll take the opposite. None of them did.
No. There's 40 cows in the field, 28 chickens. How many didn't?
How many?
Well, if there's 40 cows in the field, 20 of them ate chickens. How many didn't? Perspective, guys.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So I hope to leave your Tuesday with a little bit of humor on that note.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. Thank you.
That's when you fall in love with the English language.
Yeah. I see Angela smiling on that one. I think that one, you might use that one before the day's out.
I'd like to use that. I have one. Can I share one?
Sure.
You guys might know this one. I think my dad told this to me. So I've got 2 ducks in front of 2 ducks, 2 ducks behind 2 ducks, and 2 ducks in the middle. How many ducks?
Run that by us one more time.
Okay, good. So 2 ducks in front of 2 ducks, 2 ducks behind 2 ducks, and 2 ducks in the middle. How many ducks?
6 ducks.
6.
Anybody else have something different?
4.
I was going to say 4.
4. It's 4 ducks.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and 2 in the middle. 4 ducks.
That's a good one. Aaron, you should have gotten that one.
I know. Well, my answer wasn't wrong. But that wasn't the one she was looking for.
I do have one question.
Yes, sir.
How tall was Ollie and how tall was Dale?
You know, I don't know. I think maybe we are too. I need to call Ollie today. I'm been behind in staying in touch with him, and I need to line him up to speak to the group. I'll find out. Well, Ollie is, and by the way, is he told me when I first met him, he says, Glynn, it's Ollie like Rolly. So what, somebody was saying something and I interrupted him.
No, I was just saying maybe Ollie was a foot taller than me.
No, I don't know. We'll have to ask. But, you know, we were talking about treating people with disabilities differently. I learned a long time ago, not even to open a door for someone with a disability without asking, may I help you? In that they don't want to be treated as though they have a disability. And last time I was with Ollie in Washington, D.C., I think I told many of you, that's when I introduced him to my friend Don Green, who had introduced both of us to Jim Stovall, the author of The Ultimate Gift, which Jim Stovall is also blind. And in fact, they made a movie out of his book, The Ultimate Gift. And in fact, Greg Corradino was there to video it. I forget which one of my channels I've got it on, but I did 3 7-minute segments and where I was asking each of them their principles of success and how they would overcome adversity, which are 2 of the set questions I ask most anybody. And to set the stage, I told the story of Vince Lombardi, where he was before he was talking to the Green Bay Packers, and he was giving them a very serious conversation. And he said, gentlemen, this is a football. I want you to never forget what it looks like, what it feels like, and I want you to never forget the rules of the game. And I want you to play your heart out. And anyway, I picked up, while driving in from Richmond the day before, I picked up a football. I bought a football and I took that with me. And I held it up in that video with that discussion with them as though here I had Don that could see and I had 2 blind men. And you know, after it was over, Jim Stovall came up and he says, Glynn, out of the thousands of times I've been interviewed, you are the first person that has ever talked with me as though I was not a blind person, and I want to thank you. So it's further evidence of they want to be treated just like everyone else. And that conversation just rolled so easily. Folks, our time's about up. It's 9:27. Anyone got a burning desire to share something else in this last 2 minutes? And we don't have to kill the 2 minutes, but it's just been fun today.
Well, what you just said, Glynn, that they want to be treated like they're like everybody else. The fact is, as a Christian, I believe they are, because I believe what we are is a spirit, and this is just clothing that we're wearing temporarily. And that clothing can be so-called crippled, it can be so-called blind, it can be so-called not disabled, but it's those are just outward appearances. We're all sons and daughters of God, in my way of thinking, and that so they are completely the same as we are.
And, you know, the other thing that it took me so long to learn, and I hope everyone else is not as slow as I am, and I try to share this with, especially when I'm talking with younger people, it took me so long to ever be comfortable with who I am. I tried so long to be who I thought people wanted me to be. And has anyone ever struggled with that? Am I the Lone Ranger?
No, I think we all have that one.
Yeah.
To one degree or another, I think everybody struggles with that, Glynn.
I think even just in their natural ability, you want to survive. You want to
be like.
Want to do something that really, it even for safety reasons, you want to be that way. I think that's one of the questions I've always had about societies is how in the world in the 1920s and 30s, Germany could where it was, you know, by the late 1930s and 1940s. I mean, this was a civilized country that made some of the finest toys for kids, invented kindergarten. I mean, you know, but they could turn around and do what they did. That was a case of really losing your perspective and trying to fit in a little bit too much. And I think, you know, even individually have to watch out for things like that.
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you to each and every one of you that could be here today. Some of them had to go on and get out. But I tell you what, reminds me with you mentioning Germany. Remember, I think many of you here are in Chattanooga. Remember when we had Leona Brown, the only lady I have ever known, the only person I've ever known that met Adolf Hitler. Mm. And I found that recording when we were at the Edney building downtown Chattanooga. I challenge each and every one of you to go into the YouTube channel, Chattanooga Self-Improvement Mastermind, and you can find that, Leona Brown. And
yes, I remember it, Glynn. This is Sylvia.
Yeah, that's a good message. I'm not going to get into politics. We don't do that here, but there's a good message there. I think we all ought to look at it. Folks, our time is up. It's exactly 9:30. Thank you for being with us. Pass the word. I'll get the announcement out about Vincent Phipps. It's going to be good. It'll be really good. I love each and every one of you. I care about you. And hey, I like that bunny there. Yeah, thank you. And if any of you would like to speak, let me know. Angela, we need to get you scheduled to speak. I'll give you a call a little later on. What time do you go live today? Tell everybody about your Instagram live, how to get on there, and what time it is.
My Instagram live today is at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. It's at IG Live with Angela, and I have a special guest today. She's a motivational speaker, bodybuilder. Her name is Jennifer LaGuardia, and she also has a podcast. So she's going to come on and share what she does and why she does it.
Good deal. Well, try to join Angela today on Instagram. Again, I love you. I appreciate each and every one of you. I learn from each of you. Thank you so much. You're just a blessing in my life. And I think hopefully we're all a blessing to each other. Remember, your day will be just as good as you visualize it. I'm out of here.
Thanks, Glynn.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.